Yeah, I'm going to talk about a guy that's helped me out in fantasy a lot this year. I picked him up and at the right time too, because he got put on the first line with Detroit. And I think in his first 4 games on the first line, he had 9 points. And that's Dominic Kubalik, a guy who thrived in his first season in the NHL, scoring 30 goals for Chicago. And then he's been kind of quiet ever since. The second year wasn't bad, but it was the pandemic shortened year, and then last year was kind of a write-off. He turned out to be a third line player on Chicago, and I'll tell you, the change of scenery has done great things for him. He's on pace for 98 points this season. He's got 7 goals, 11 assists in 15 games, and his career high in assists is 21. He's on pace to absolutely obliterate that number. The one thing I've noticed about him that is really standing out to me is that he's up there in points, and I think he was tied for first on Detroit last I looked, with relatively low time on ice. I think his points per 60 is 4.39 points per 60, and that puts him at 11th in the league, just behind my guy Jesper Bratt. So he's taking every minute he gets and really putting in a good shift. His game against Detroit, or against New Jersey, he was the most noticeable player on the ice at all times for me. He just finds open ice so well, and I've really enjoyed what he's doing there, and I'm kind of rooting for him, especially because I have him in fantasy.
I was going to say there's a fantasy connection there that I think you haven't mentioned yet, because I know you've been very high on the guy all year because, rightfully so, he's been incredible. So that's great to hear. You always wonder when a bunch of new players hop into a mix, like what happened there in Detroit. They've got a bunch of new guys trying to play a system. Like how are they going to gel? How is the line chemistry going to, shake out as the year goes on? But Kubalik has found himself a nice spot in that lineup, even though he's not playing as much as, maybe you would expect him to be after looking at the numbers. But he's had just a great start to the season. In case there's a reason I didn't pick Kubalik, because I figured you would bring him up with the fantasy connection and everything. So yeah, what a great start to the season for the guy.
I was a little surprised in the pick, honestly, Case. I thought for sure you were going to go with John Marino of your Devils, but you went with the fantasy connection there, which was great. He's had a fabulous start. I'm still kind of wondering why Kyle Davidson and the Blackhawks gave this guy up. I know he kind of struggled the past 2 years, but still a young guy and still one of those guys who has a great shot. He's proven before that he can put the puck in the back of the net. Him and Victor Olofsson kind of broke out at the same time a couple of years ago, if you guys remember, and they were in that Calder Trophy conversation sort of down the list a little bit, and Buffalo ultimately decided to hang on to Olofsson just because he's one of those guys that he's just able to be a trigger man and just fire the puck and score goals. And Chicago ultimately decided to let go of this guy. And, again, Steve Yzerman and the Red Wings proving that not only are they good at the draft table, but they're pretty darn good at pro scouting as well. So this guy's had a great start. That's a great pick.
Yeah, I had to go with him over Marino because I think I've talked Marino to death so far this season. Everyone knows that he's been like my favorite guy on New Jersey this year, best defenseman. But I had the fantasy connection with Kubalik, and it's also good to point out, you pointed out that he had a great rookie season, and he was kind of head-to-head with Victor Olofsson. While I did not like the guy back then because he was a 24-year-old rookie and everyone was giving him the Calder, and I just hate that. So, yeah, I've gone, full circle. I'm or 180, I guess you should say. I love him now. He's my guy.
Yeah, and your second favorite player, Michael Bunting.
Yeah, not even close.
All right. Chadwick, let's go to you now. And I know you've got one guy in particular, but maybe a couple honorable mentions as well.
That's right. I for all of these, I always have a few honorable mentions. I feel like Casey normally does too, if he wasn't busy right before we hopped on here. But the one honorable mention I want to bring up is a guy I already talked about, and that's Max Domi. Like I said, he's second on the team in points in Chicago, coming over from Carolina after being flipped at the deadline last season, and he's fit in pretty nicely in the top six in Chicago, mainly because he's one of the only offensive weapons that they have up front now, aside from your Taves and Canes of the world, etc. But right now, Max Domi is proving that he deserves maybe to be flipped again at the deadline to another contending team, and that's really what he's playing for at this point. He's playing for his next contract, and he's playing for the opportunity to get flipped at the deadline to a contending team. So 10 points in 14 games. He's off to a great start. And looking at the advanced numbers too, in terms of the expected goals that he's generating, it's pretty much on par with what he scored so far. So it doesn't seem like he's going to regress because he's getting such a great opportunity up front in Chicago. So any thoughts on Max Domi as sort of an honorable mention before I get to my meat and potatoes here?
Okay, I think I called them last chance you at the beginning of the season because there's just so many guys that seem to be getting a crack at some real minutes on this team, and a lot of new faces on Chicago because they traded everyone except the big two, and so it seemed almost inevitable that we'd be talking about at least one guy on this team having a great change of scenery story, and Max Domi is definitely the great candidate for that and the perfect choice, honestly, out of all of them. He's been great for them, and hopefully he finds himself on a playoff team after the at the trade deadline.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's crazy to think that Domi was a 70-point guy a few years ago with the Montreal Canadiens. That's where he really broke out, and then things kind of went sour with him there afterwards, and didn't particularly get along well with Claude Julien at the time and when he was behind the bench in Montreal. But we've always known that the talent is there with Max Domi, but he's been around the block a little bit now. He's had some experiences, and it was a very interesting pickup for Carolina to make at the deadline. I kind of forgot about Domi last year at the deadline, but he played decently well for Columbus, and we knew that when Chicago signed him in the offseason, they were tearing things down. They were giving guys like him, Athanasiou, Colin Blackwell, etc., good opportunities on this roster, and he's taken it so far, and he's run with it. He's got the talent. We've always known that. He's got a lot of heart, just like his dad when he played, and so, happy for Max Domi, and I think potentially Chicago's got a nice trade chip to use here.
Yeah, they can for sure get a pick and maybe a prospect at the deadline for him, depending on what the market looks like.